30 days. 30 days from Election Day. Just 1 month for candidates up and down the ballot to make their case to the American people. They're on the campaign trail, and today we have new details about the road ahead for Vice President Harris. The VP is launching what the campaign is calling a media blitz this week, including interviews with 60 Minutes, The View, Howard Stern, Stephen Colbert, and a town hall with Univision. She'll also campaign in Nevada and Arizona. Yesterday, Harris traveled to North Carolina to meet with volunteers and first responders in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. And Donald Trump, he returned to Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of his first attempted assassination in July. What could have been a somber rally, it quickly turned into a venting session as the ex-president spread dangerous lies yet again.
Over the past 8 years, those who want to stop us from achieving this future have slandered me, impeached me, indicted me, tried to throw me off the ballot, and who knows, maybe even tried to kill me. But I've never stopped fighting for you, and I never will.
Joining us now is Olivia Troy. She served as Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to then Vice President Mike Pence.
So, Olivia, there's just so much about yesterday's rally in Butler, and Simone said it correctly. It could have been a very somber moment. First off, I'll just backtrack. I don't know why the hell they went back to Butler in the first place, but I do know why they go, because they wanted to take advantage of the political moment. So let's just be honest about why he was there. But then you have this with Elon Musk, who also joined him, where the two of them kind of set the mood. Let's just listen to this little mashup of the Elon Musk, Donald Trump confab.
We have to save our country, so you have to get out and vote. You got to get out and vote. You got to get your friends and vote, because, you know, they play a lot of tricks, this particular other side.
You must have free speech in order to have democracy. That's why it's the First Amendment. And the Second Amendment is there to ensure that we have the First Amendment. President Trump must win to preserve the Constitution.
So this from the man who actually told us, why don't we tear up the Constitution? So there's all this nonsense about preserving the Constitution. The Second Amendment is there for the First Amendment, all of this stuff. And then to package it around the lie that someone yet again is trying to steal the election. What the next 30 days, what has to be, I think, a core focus for, or you think should be a core focus for the Harris campaign going into this?
I think it's going to be critical to counter this disinformation that's ongoing. They're certainly doubling down on it in terms of the lead up to the election, and remind people that this is the exact same playbook that Donald Trump used in 2020. Right, this is what they're doing. And in the lead up to it, they're trying to create doubt in the voters' minds. They're undermining the process. Now he's got an accomplice with it. Now he's got Elon Musk, who owns one of the largest social media platforms, that are being co-opted into being allies in this space. And so I think it's going to be important to remind voters that all of these charges against Donald Trump, it's called the rule of law. It's called accountability. That's what that is, right? That's how this is playing out. And look, there are numerous court cases. There are numerous people, even on his own staff along the way, who have said the 2020 election was secure, it was fair, he knew he lost it. Remind people of the fact that he's doing it again in the lead up to this one.
You know, it's early in the morning to hear this much Donald Trump, this much Elon Musk, and certainly this much J.D. Vance, Olivia, my friend. And yet, I feel it is important to take a listen to what they are saying at these rallies so that we all understand the message that they believe is their closing message in the last 30 days. So take a listen to J.D. Vance, and you and I will talk about it on the other side.
Kamala Harris said that he was attacking, quote, the foundations of our democracy. And I think you all will join me in saying to Kamala Harris, how dare you talk about threats to democracy? Donald Trump took a bullet for democracy. What the hell have you done?
Talk to me, one, about the jujitsuing of this democracy line of attack, how they're trying to say that they are not the threat to democracy, that if anything, they're actually protecting democracy, trying to somehow tie the assassination attempt to this protection of democracy. And also, I don't know if you saw it, and I don't know if it's a sanctioned campaign sign, but that sign in the background that says "Never Surrender" with Trump's mugshot on it, to me, it is all of a piece.
Yeah, certainly it's a manufactured production. And I think it's also dangerous because what they're doing is they're, again, trying to radicalize their voters, trying to set them up in the lead up to this election. And I'll say this, to remind voters that over hundreds of people, whether they were on Donald Trump's cabinet, whether they were former Republican officials in administrations, whether it was his own staff, have said that Donald Trump is unfit and he's dangerous, right? And that goes along with what we're seeing right now play out with J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. Now they're trying to flip the script. Now they're saying that, oh, we represent democracy. Okay, well, I think, the facts are the facts. Those of us who lived it firsthand in the Trump White House saw what Donald Trump is capable of. So are the people that surround him. And so I think it's important to sit here and watch this and prepare for what's at stake here. And I think it tells us what we're going to be up against in the aftermath of this election, regardless of how it goes.
I'm just disgusted by that soundbite because Donald Trump did not take a bullet for democracy. Like, democracy didn't require that he be shot. Right? Democracy did not require an assassination attempt. I think perhaps we have different definitions of democracy. It didn't have to happen, and I think we can all join in saying we are glad that the former president is okay and is here. Yeah. So, like, this bullet for democracy mess is, like, literally insane. I'm struck by 30 days. We've all been out on the campaign trail. 30 days is like, this is where it gets crunch time. This is where tempers get short. On the campaign trail. This is where
they get short real fast.
They get short very fast. This is where it's like, you know what? I do not want you sitting next to me on the plane anymore or on the bus. This is where candidates can make or break a campaign. This is going to come down to the very last second. And what the Harris campaign has laid out in this memo that we have this morning about what the strategy is, just this next week and a half, to me, says that the vice president is not going to leave anything on the field. She, at the end of the day, win or lose, is going to be able to say she did everything she could. I don't necessarily see the same thing from the Trump campaign, which makes me wonder what is the strategy to win this election? Kamala Harris's strategy is hit the targets, go everywhere, get on TV, make your case. Then we got bullet for democracy.
Yeah, I think the strategy for Trump is continue the fear-mongering and hope that the fear inspires a greater voting bloc. But I don't think that voting bloc is going to grow given his demeanor. I think with Kamala Harris, I think you're absolutely right. I have been so impressed with the fact that they are working hard for this every single day, right? She is out there on the campaign trail. And I think for her, she's connecting with the voters. And I think it plays to her benefit because I certainly, the first time I saw her in action, the first time I saw her in a panel with conservative women, I really just grew to have so much tremendous respect for her. The empathy that she shows, the connection that she has, and she's relatable, right? She's relating to everyday people. And I think that's what's so incredible about her. I think it's powerful for her. And I think the next 30 days, I think, I'm grateful that we're going to see more of her. I think that's going to be important. And I think that she states the case herself. I mean, these are people that are understanding of what Americans are facing. And I think that they represent that instead of this performative theater that we're seeing from Donald Trump repeatedly. It's more of the same.
I think to that point, and certainly to yours, Simone, about the whole protect democracy. Donald Trump took a bullet for democracy. Okay. And you're right. That is absolutely insane. But you did an ad for the Harris campaign, which really struck, I think, a broad nerve. At least what I saw on social media, what I saw from folks who texted and wrote to me about the ad. Let's take a look at your response, if you will, with your ad, Protect.
I served in Donald Trump's administration, but I know Kamala Harris is the leader we need to keep our country safe and strong. Throughout her career, she's gotten drug traffickers off the streets and protected vulnerable people from fraud. And as a Homeland Security expert, I trust her to protect the border. Kamala Harris's plan will strengthen our border security and crack down on drug smuggling and human trafficking. We need a president who's tough, who cares about the American people, and who puts the country first. That's Kamala Harris.
So this leveling up these two ideas, the laughable Donald Trump took a bullet for democracy versus a president who wants to put the country first. Because that really is where you drew. I remember after you referenced the meeting where you did the first program you ever did with Kamala Harris, you and I were texting back and forth, and you were she was blown away. I'm just to share a little bit of our text. You were blown away by that moment. So now it's come full circle with this ad, Protect. What's the messaging ultimately here for voters to take away?
Yeah, I think for me, and also some of the feedback I've got from the ad, was that I'm looking for a leader that's actually going to work to solve problems, someone that's actually going to take the problem, take it seriously, and actually work to resolve it. And that's why I felt strongly about doing the ad, because I worked the immigration portfolio all 4 years of the Trump administration, just to be clear. I worked every executive order, every immigration order that came out.
So you're one of the few who were there for the full 4 years.
I was all 4 years. Yeah. I was at DHS. I worked on the travel ban. I saw them the work on the border wall. I was in the policy discussions on this. And what I saw was that it was racially charged extremism instead of actually looking at the concrete immigration system and saying, how are we actually going to fix this for the greater good of the long term of the country? And I think that when I look at Donald Trump, that's more of what's to come in a Donald Trump presidency. And I think for Kamala Harris, she's looking at this and she's like, I have the experience. She does. You know, she was out there. She was prosecuting transnational organized crime in California. She prosecuted the Sinaloa cartel, which Stephen Miller in these meetings would tout like, we got to go after the cartels. Well, she did it. She did it. I have yet to see Donald Trump, tour a drug smuggling tunnel like Kamala did back in the day in California. You know, I mean, the reality is that I want a leader that's actually going to make a tangible difference. And I think when I'm hearing from people when they saw that ad, I even heard from former cabinet members of the Trump administration who said that was a powerful ad. We agree with that.
Joining me now is the Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's the ranking member of the Oversight and Accountability Committee. He served on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Congressman, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. It's great to be with you, Ali.
Congressman, I'm interested in the fact that the conclusions that Jack Smith came to in his new filing about what is personal versus what is official don't feel like a responsibility he should have to have, but the Supreme Court said that they're going to have to parse this stuff. What's your sense of how he's done so, how he has made a much clearer determination that there's no possibility that these things Donald Trump did could have been in an official capacity?
Well, the Supreme Court's absurd decision finding that the president is immune from criminal prosecution for any criminal acts undertaken under the rubric of his office actually is an enormously clarifying thing. When you read Jack Smith's filing, you can see so clearly all of the cases, which was most of his conduct, where Donald Trump was acting not under the rubric of his office at all, but simply as a political candidate, a frustrated and angry political candidate who stepped outside of the rule of law and decided he was going to overthrow it. And, you know, it is not part of the job of the president to get involved with staging electoral college slates. That belongs to the states. It's not part of the president's job to enforce the presidential election in any way. If you read the Constitution, the president has no job, and obviously so, in conducting elections, yet he got involved, not as an official, not someone trying to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, rather as a political candidate trying to frustrate the entire process and then overturn the presidential election, which Joe Biden had won by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College.
Congressman, one of the interesting things about this is that if Donald Trump wins the election, there's not much chance of this case seeing the light of day. But if he doesn't and it moves forward, it'll probably at some point get back to the Supreme Court. Does the way Jack Smith's laid it out put some pressure on the Supreme Court to say, all right, you've met our weird bar here, and there's no reason to prevent this case from proceeding?
Well, I think that's so. And I think, you know, Jack Smith filled in a whole bunch of new details that the January 6th Select Committee did not have access to, and the House impeachment team did not have access to when we went over to the Senate. I mean, we have the striking moment of Donald Trump saying, so what, when he's told that Mike Pence is fleeing for his life. and exiting the building. On the contrary, right after 2 p.m., Donald Trump sent out a tweet saying Mike Pence did not have the courage to do what needed to be done. In other words, egging the mob on further, exhorting them to continue their attempts to get the vice president. And of course, the walls were ringing with the chant, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence." And his response to it was, "So what?" There was also a very striking moment that caught my eye in this filing where Trump says to Mike Pence that hundreds of thousands of people will hate your guts if he doesn't cooperate with Trump's plan to set aside the presidential election and just claim office. That, to me, is a very striking moment because you can read it either as Donald Trump threatening him politically, which obviously it was, but you can also read it very clearly as Donald Trump threatening him physically. Hundreds of thousands of people, the kinds of people who Trump had just incited to come and storm the Capitol, will hate your guts. In other words, putting him in direct fear of his life. And that has been the tenor and the tone of everything that Donald Trump has said about the 2020 presidential election, and they continue to organize politically around the big lie. It's a remarkable thing. There was this woman just sentenced to jail for 8 or 9 years in Colorado, a clerk of court who continued to propound the big lie. And the judge's statements at the sentencing are just remarkable, saying you're a charlatan, you've been pushing these big lies, there's nothing behind them, and you're going to jail. But Donald Trump doesn't care. I hope at least that case will be a demonstration project for people around the country who may be tempted to go with Trump in trying to overthrow a Kamala Harris victory in this presidential election.
And of course, you're talking about the case of Tina Peters, and I would encourage people who don't normally look at transcripts from court cases or rulings and judgments to do so, to see what this judge has said about Tina Peters. Congressman, the filing also, to your point about spreading the big lie, it presents communications that show that Donald Trump knew full well he had lost the election, but continued to spread lies about it, including evidence that Trump had no intention of respecting either the election outcome or the outcome of other audits, surveys, recounts. White House staffer is said to have overheard Trump telling family members, quote, "Doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still have to fight like hell." The reason that's relevant is for what you just said. We are setting the stage now. Donald Trump is setting the stage for not accepting the outcome of the election. He's adding his xenophobia to it, saying that it's going to be a whole lot of immigrants who do not speak English, do not even know what country they're in, but somehow they're going to organize to vote for Kamala Harris. It sounds funny, but it's not.
Look, he had no official duty that he was executing when he tried to construct counterfeit electoral slates. There was no official duty he was executing when he said to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, "Just find me 11,780 votes." There was no official duty he was executing when he told Mike Pence to bow down to him and don't be so honest and all of that stuff. There was no official duty at stake. But we also know that there was neither an official nor an unofficial reason for him to believe anything was wrong. On the contrary, he was being told by everybody he had lost the election. So there's both objective and subjective reason to understand he was acting as a candidate, and as a candidate, he was acting as an outlaw candidate. And I would say he was acting like a tyrant in the strict Greek etymological sense of the term. He was acting as someone who wants to overthrow the constitutional order and comes from outside of the legal order, not accepting any of the rule of law in the process.
Congressman, good to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us this morning. The Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland.
So this is one of those weeks that really seemed to remind us in pretty stark terms what is at stake in this election. I mean, just take Tuesday night's vice presidential debate. And that moment at the very end when everyone watching was definitely reminded that this election is anything but normal.
Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
Tim Walz's face says it all. I mean, the Republican nominee for vice president of the United States wouldn't even say who won the last election. Okay, but that was only Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, a new filing from special counsel Jack Smith was unsealed, painting an even more vivid picture of Donald Trump's scheme to overturn that election. And then on Thursday, lifelong Republican and former Congresswoman Liz Cheney reminded the American people why all of this matters.
Donald Trump was willing to sacrifice our Capitol to allow law enforcement officers to be beaten and brutalized in his name, and to violate the law and the Constitution in order to seize power for himself. I don't care if you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. That is depravity, and we must never become numb to it.
So yeah, everything that happened this week was a reminder of the huge, giant, enormous stakes, whatever adjective you want to use, of this election. And it didn't even stop there. Because yesterday, Trump returned to Butler, Pennsylvania, which is, of course, the same site of the assassination attempt against him back in July. Now, no matter what your political beliefs out there are, I think we can all acknowledge that was a terrible moment this summer. No one, of course, should be targeted. And while Trump did begin that rally by commemorating the man who was killed and others who were injured that day, he very quickly reverted back to his typical self, playing the victim card and casting himself as a martyr.
Over the past 8 years, those who want to stop us from achieving this future have slandered me, impeached me, indicted me, tried to throw me off the ballot, and who knows, maybe even tried to kill me.
I mean, that is a completely crazy statement, all of it. And it could not be further from the truth. No, his political opponents did not try to kill him. And let's not pretend his impeachments and indictments were prompted by anything other than his own actions. In fact, almost a full 4 years after his loss, he's still clinging to this lie that he won the last election. Of course, many leading Republicans want to ignore this and pretend it's not an issue. They want to move on. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker said this week, voters are long over January 6th. And Congressman Tom Emmer basically said this is something that only the media cares about. And here's House Speaker Mike Johnson just earlier this morning.
Can you say unequivocally that Joe Biden won the 2020 election and Donald Trump lost?
See, this is the game that is always played by mainstream media with leading Republicans. It's a gotcha game. You want us to litigate things that happened 4 years ago when we're talking about the future.
It's a gotcha game. It's all a media obsession. Over here in MAGA land, we're focused on the future. That's what he's trying to say. It's also not a hard question, by the way. Now, look, for anyone out there wondering why we're still talking about this, it's in large part because their guy, Donald Trump, won't shut up about it. In fact, it's the entire reason he's running. And don't just take my word for it. Take his. Here's Trump just 3 days ago.
It was a rigged election. You have to tell Kamala Harris that's why I'm doing it again. If I thought I lost, I wouldn't be doing this again.
If I thought I lost, I wouldn't be doing this again. There we go. There it is. Now, the issue for all of us as a country is that this is not only a then problem, it's very much a now problem, because Donald Trump is leading efforts to steal this upcoming election, too. I mean, right now, Republicans are filing a flurry of frivolous but dangerous election lawsuits in swing states across the country, like in Georgia or the third largest county in Pennsylvania, where they are trying to force officials to count ballots by hand, or in Nevada and other states where they are continuing to push false claims about non-citizens voting, or in all of the places they are working to try and delay or even block the certification of election results. Already, we're 30 days out even from the election. These are pages, by the way, out of the very same playbook we saw in 2020. But this time, they've had some practice. So I know Trump's allies like to say they're focused on the future. Well, all of this is the future. What we saw on January 6th, what Jack Smith just vividly outlined, what Liz Cheney is warning against, this isn't the past. It's actually the plan. Harry Dunn is a former Capitol Police officer who protected the Capitol during January 6th. He's been out campaigning across the country. Michael Cohen is Donald Trump's former attorney. He's also the host of The Michael Cohen Show on YouTube, as well as the Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown podcast. And few people have a better understanding of what Trump is capable of than these two. So, Harry, I'm going to start with you because you're here with me on set. And I just wanted to get your reaction. I played a clip of Trump from the rally. I know you watched other parts of the rally. He's basically painting himself as the martyr, as somebody who everybody is going after. What do you make of that, and what is your reaction to it?
Well, just the first thing, like you acknowledged, the assassination attempt that happened, it shouldn't be taken lightly, and it shouldn't be wished upon anybody. It's repulsive. See how easy that was, condemning something that was bad.
And accurate, and everybody should say that.
Everybody should say that. But if you notice during that little clip that you just showed, every statement was me, 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 me. Not us, not the country. It's all about Donald Trump. Anytime he talks, it's all about him. And that's why the Republicans that you just showed, Mike Johnson, J.D. Vance during the debate, were unable to say that he lost the election, because that is the litmus test for Donald Trump. Can you say that you support me no matter what? Unequivocally, loyalty to me. And that's very dangerous, loyalty to one man instead of the Constitution.
No question. Now, Michael, let me ask you, I'm sure you watched that rally or watched parts of that rally. What was your reaction to it?
It was exactly as all of the other rallies. I mean, Butler was no different than the one he did before in that gymnasium. It's always, as Harry just said appropriately and accurately, it's all about me, me, me. He's not running to do anything for the country. He's running in order to protect himself. He's already sitting with a $90+ million judgment for E. Jean Carroll. He's already sitting with a $500 million judgment with the New York Attorney General. He's sitting with 34 criminal guilty counts by the Manhattan District Attorney and 4 remaining indictments, 3 and then the superseding. He's only running to protect himself. And I don't understand why people just don't see what is so obvious. It's so glaring in front of everybody's face, but they want to ignore it. Why? Again, I think I'm as confused about that as everybody else.
Now, hopefully we're reminding people of what's at stake. And so I want to ask you, Harry, about the security piece here, because, there are many indications here that Donald Trump is planning exactly the same things that he's planned before, questioning the outcome, fake electors, lawsuits everywhere. Yeah. President Biden was asked this week when he went to the briefing room about this. And they think this is important, not just because he is because he's the sitting president, really, because he has access to briefings. They would be thinking about security threats right now. But let's play that, and I want to get your thoughts on it.
I'm confident it'll be free and fair. I don't know whether it will be peaceful. They haven't even accepted the outcome of the last election. So I'm concerned about what they're going to do.
It's a pretty remarkable thing for any president to say. I'm not sure if it will be peaceful.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because it was peaceful for the entire history of America until it wasn't because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump set the precedent for it not being peaceful. And you mentioned the lawsuits that are being out there. I got to acknowledge Mark Elias and his group, the work that they're doing, trying to save democracy at the ballot, in the courtroom in the legal ways. So it's definitely very important that Donald Trump when he debated Joe Biden, he was asked 3 times, would he be able to accept the election results? And then he could not answer that straightforward. He was unable to. And that's what he did leading up to January 6th. He planted the seeds of doubt, and that's what he's doing now. So when Joe Biden said that, hey, it may not be peaceful, yeah, it's unprecedented for him to say that, but it's also a reality because we saw what happened on January 6th, where police officers were beaten, all because Donald Trump, they were there because of a lie. While they were attacking police officers, they said, we're here because Donald Trump sent us. We're here to stop the steal. The election was stolen. So January 6th, the violence that occurred that day was based off of a lie. And, Congress, I appreciate the work that they did with the Electoral College Reform Act. So they've done things, but you can't. So when Joe Biden said, it will be free and fair, but will it be peaceful? That's yet to be seen.
Which is, and that statement, but also just what we're all seeing with our own eyes here is a reminder. And Michael, I want to ask you, there are a number of Republicans out there who are saying, let's move on. January 6th is in the past. I'm struck by the fact that Donald Trump is essentially running on this, right? He's made clear he wants to replicate some of the things that happened in 2020. You know him well. What do you make of all of these efforts by a number of Republicans to say it's in the past, it doesn't matter? Do you think, is there any reason to doubt he wants to repeat a number of the actions he took 4 years ago?
Well, look, that's it's a pretty interesting question. First and foremost, let me say that the Republicans that are demonstrating their fealty to Donald have something that they want as a result if, God forbid, Trump ends up winning the election. But there are also a slew of Republicans that are not asking for the same thing, that they do not want to just put this thing in the past, that they want to see the United States, they want to see unity in the United States and start getting rid of the chaos and the divisiveness so that we can all work together for, mutual benefits. This is very different than what Donald Trump is saying. Donald Trump continues with that bombastic, with the rhetoric of divisiveness and hate. And the big warning that I want people to understand is when Donald Trump says something, stop sane-washing it. Stop trying to make it into something which has some normalcy to it. What he says he intends to do. And when he turns around and says, Jen, to, like the head of this network or other people who are critics, that he intends to use SEAL Team 6 or the military within which to round up his critics or his opponents, he intends to do it. And I say that with firsthand experience. What Donald Trump, Bill Barr, the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Prisons did to me, the unconstitutional remand of a United States citizen, making me the first political prisoner in this country to be held by my own country because I wouldn't waive my First Amendment constitutional right. What that was for Trump, if you want to use Tim Walz's sort of comment, that was a practice play. And now that he knows exactly how to get away with it, I suspect that there's going to be many, many more people that will be incarcerated at simply Donald's whim and simply because he deems them to be a critic.
He knows more now. I think that is one of the things I've thought about a lot. He's also surrounded himself with a running mate who's willing to implement, a Speaker of the House who helped him implement last time. Yeah. Harry Dunn, Michael Cohen, thank you both.
Joining me now, W. Kamau Bell. He's a stand-up comedian, the Emmy Award-winning executive producer of United Shades of America, the author of The Awkward Thoughts of W. Kamau Bell and Do the Work. Kamau, good to have you on the show. Nice to see you again, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about Trump's return trip to Butler, Pennsylvania, hinting that there may be some people who indicted him, impeached him, and maybe tried to assassinate him. It's ridiculous, except that it's dangerous, and people think about this stuff, and they potentially could take action on it.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that is uninspiring, it's hearing Elon Musk talk freely. I don't know why. Remember when X was supposed to be a nonpartisan platform? Remember back in the old days when he bought this platform? And now I don't know if that's clearly not nonpartisan. And it's also not a platform that cares about facts or anything. And so they can get up there and say whatever they want to say, and their crowd will eat the red meat because they don't care about facts either.
I'm kind of fascinated that Musk has become sort of a partner in this thing to Donald Trump. But they seem to be simpatico on a lot of fronts. But now Elon Musk, who runs this platform, is talking about how somehow the left would like to not count your votes and end elections. All these things that Donald Trump actually talks about. He talks about suspending the Constitution for a day. He talks about not counting votes. He talks about how immigrants are stealing this election somehow. And yet this just keeps on growing. There's no shame and there's no embarrassment at not having any evidence for anything you say now.
Yeah, my therapist calls this projection. So this is when you accuse someone of doing the things that you're doing, this is what is happening. They feel like if they can accuse us, they can distract us from the things that they are all doing. And the case is horribly weak, but unfortunately they have really played to the worst instincts of people and played to the lowest character of people. And people love a freak show. And so the freak show is on tour, and yesterday it was in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Let's talk about what happened in Michigan. I think it was Friday. Magic Johnson was out there on the campaign trail for Kamala Harris. And in the midst of a very, very big rally with all sorts of people, he made an appeal directly to black men, saying Trump, quote, did not deliver for them in his first term. A recent poll from Howard University shows that 21% of black men under 50 who are likely voters are still saying that they will support Donald Trump. And one of the criticisms of Democrats that they have is that they continue to feel taken for granted as black men. Give me your take on this.
Well, first of all, thank God I'm not a black man under 50. So that's the first time I've ever thought I'd say that. But yeah, I think let's be clear. The same toxic masculinity that is weaponizing all men, white men specifically, against each other against the rest of us on the internet is also affecting black men. Now, there are legitimate reasons to not want to support Kamala Harris. I don't know if there's legitimate reasons for black men to support Trump. I think that is basically misogynoir, as we say. But I think that the idea that, we are all vulnerable to the misinformation online. And I think that certainly it is a thing we can speak to, because my feeling is like, you can vote for whoever you want to, but just have the right information. And I think a lot of if a black man doesn't know if he wants to vote for Kamala Harris, that's one thing. Yep. But a black man who wants to vote for Trump, I think is confused about the information out there.
And Magic Johnson did make that point. He was talking to people in that auditorium, say it's our job to help communicate this to people. He wasn't. That was exactly the message he was giving. All right, come on. You're starring in a new election video that is being released tomorrow. It's called "Who's Going to Catch Your Kid?" and it touches on the core contrasts of this particular race, including care versus control, family values, and masculinity. You have been gracious enough to give us an exclusive first look. So for my viewers, this is the first time you're going to see this. Let's have a sneak peek.
As a dad, or as a girl dad if you absolutely must, I think a lot about how I want to show up for my kids. You can lead with anger, or you can lead with joy. There's care, and there's control.
What does that mean?
Let me tell you. Welcome to the library. How can I help you?
I want a book about family.
Sure, we have all kinds of books because there are all kinds of families. Help yourself.
Thanks.
That's care. This is control.
Can I have a book about families?
Here you go.
Can I have a different one?
Ooh, this one's autographed. We only have books about straight white dudes. They don't mention racism, sexism, gay people, trans people, or climate change.
Gross.
Yep. When I look at Tim Waltz, I see the kind of dad I try to be. The let's make it a game dad. The hey, I changed your oil dad. The never been found guilty of 34 felonies and liable for sexual abuse dad. When I look at J.D. Vance, well...
I had a Diet Mountain Dew yesterday and one today. I'm sure they're going to call that racist too.
You just said that this is a story that you created.
The entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children, by a bunch of childless cat ladies.
He can't even imagine people caring about kids that aren't theirs. He's that dude where if the kid falls off the play thingy, he does nothing, pretends not to see, doesn't even look around and see where the parent is. Whoa! Here you go.
Thank you so much.
It's all right. I'm a comedian. Trump and Vance don't care about helping your family, but they definitely care about controlling it, taking away your right to birth control and IVF. And they care a lot about who gets to use what bathroom. You know you have gender-neutral bathrooms in your home, right? These guys want to take us right back to the 50s. Not those 50s. That's the one. Look, no dad gets everything right. I'm supposed to be making a Halloween costume right now. But we do have choices between the future we want and the future they want to force on us. There's care and there's control. Who's going to catch your kid, America?
All right, that's fantastic. Come on, and I'm going home and I'm going to put gender neutral on the bathroom. One of the things you touch on there is something that's very close to us, right? With the Velshi Banned Book Club, we talk about banned books all the time, and you illustrate it in that one little piece where you say, kid wants a book about family. Family's a lot of things, and you want that teacher or that librarian who can curate it and say, what is it you're looking for? Let me give you more of that, and you demonstrate what the alternative is. Books that are all the same. It has never worked out in any society to ban books. It never ends up well.
No, and I think that, there's an example right now of control of books happening in Oklahoma. The superintendent of the public schools, Ryan Walters, who declared there's got to be a Bible in every classroom. And you see that it's not really even an ideological thought. It's a grift, because the Bible they want are Bibles endorsed by Trump. Bibles that he gets paid to endorse. So this is not even an ideological battle. It's all a grift. And I think the more we point it out as exposing it that way, the better we are.
The other thing with you know what Donald Trump did in the debate about Haitians in Springfield, he wrapped all of the racism and xenophobia all into one. Black people, immigrants, eating pets, tropes. It does feel like the desperate last gasps of a campaign, or at least a campaign that figures we're not going broad. We're going super narrow, but we'd like you all to turn out and vote for us because you're at deep risk of all of these people taking over your life, culture, and country.
You know, I think we often think that we're in the desperate last gasps of blatant racism, sexism, homophobia. Didn't we think that with George Wallace in Alabama, or Huey Long, or you know, Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia? I feel like we always think we're in that last gasp. We thought Obama was the avatar of younger, more vibrant, more progressive presidents, and it's not true. So I think that's why it's necessary to stand up to this stuff, because I want to be clear. I'm not some Kamala Harris stan. I live here in the Bay Area, and, you know, she's not always super supported out here. There's synagogues all around my neighborhood that say permanent ceasefire, and Kamala Harris hasn't been clear enough about that. So, but I think when it's so clear on the other side that what they are doing is only weaponizing hate, and they are very clear that fascism is coming, you have to sort of put the person in the bully pulpit you think you have the best chance of bullying, and I don't think that is Trump and Vance.
Put the person in the bully pulpit who you think you have the best chance of bullying. Well said. I often say it's the person you think you can have the most influence on, but you, as always, say it better. Kamau Bell, good to see you, as always. W. Kamau Bell is a stand-up comedian, an Emmy Award-winning executive producer of United Shades of America, and the author of The Awkward Thoughts of W. Kamau Bell and Do the Work.